I find quite useful with a metronome is that you can actually determine the tiny tempo differences. So one thing that I like to do is when I'm playing a technically demanding piece that I don't feel 100% comfortable with yet, I like to play it in slightly different tempos, at slightly different speeds. So let's say my final tempo is 144, then I like to practice it at 138 and at 132 and maybe even at 152, so that my fingers are quite flexible within that speed and it's not just that one automatic movement that they're doing in the same tempo. So there I like to use the metronome to just have those nuances, to check those slight tempo differences and then play through the piece. And again, I'm not talking about like a sonata, I'm talking about a study or maybe a technical passage of a sonata or a piano concerto. So let's say not the entire piece, but play through that section, that technical section, in a slightly lower or a slightly higher tempo. That is also a great way to just, feel more secure in the actual tempo. Then also playing through a sonata or a piano concerto's technical passage with a metronome in the actual tempo can be very helpful if you keep in mind that that is not the version that you're going to be playing on stage. So I like to sometimes just break it down to the pure, let's say, mechanical rhythm, and just make sure that I'm actually able to do it without any rubato, without any freedom, to just actually technically play it just in tempo, without rushing, without getting slower. And then, so I do that run through with a metronome, and then I switch off the metronome, and I actually do the whole thing in the way that I would play it on stage, freely and with what I like to call the human heartbeat. The metronome can of course be a great reference for you as to which level you're at with a particular piece. As I mentioned in my videos about the Chopin studies, I would begin those studies at, let's say, 80, and then every week or every other day or every 3 days increase the tempo just by like one metronome line, so 80, 84, 88, 92. So it can also be a very good reference as to where you're at, and also of course what your end tempo would be. Another thing I just want to mention, it also is a big subject in itself, is using the metronome as a reference of the tempo of a piece. So we all know that on the metronome it says, for example, 120 to 44, I'm not even sure because it differs, is, let's say, allegro, and 18 to 120 is andante, adagio is 80. It's always different what exactly they have defined. And this is something that I just want to mention. I would be very, very careful with those numbers. So I would never say, if a piece, let's say, has the title andante, okay, I'm just going to take that number on the metronome and then play it. There are so many factors that go into determining the speed of a piece. For example, it also is which beat it's written in. So is it a 4/4 beat? Is it a 3/4 beat? Is it an alla breve? Alla breve makes a big difference. Alla breve means it's actually faster. So if it's an adagio but it's alla breve, it definitely is not that number on the metronome that stands for adagio. Stuff like that are things that we have to keep in mind. Also, of course, the character that is written on there. So is it, for example, an allegro ma non troppo, which means allegro but not too fast, not too much? Or is it an allegro con fuoco, which means an allegro with fire? So I would definitely not use the numbers on the metronome as a reference to the tempi. That can be very dangerous. The tempi really have a lot of factors that go into it, and you really have to think about what tempo that is and then determine it on the metronome if you want to have it as a reference. And one final thought that I would like to add is you can use the metronome as, let's say, a given mechanical beat, but you can also use the metronome and kind of expand the time between the beats in a more human way. I know this sounds kind of complicated the way I put it, but what I mean by that is you can have the same beat going and you can be playing in two different ways. You can let the beat dictate how you're playing, but you can also use that time between the beats and kind of form freedom there. And this can also be very helpful when you're practicing with a metronome, so that you realize that within the beat, within those, let's say, mechanical beats and sections, there is freedom, and there is freedom to form the music. So in general, I would say the metronome can be a great tool to keep you in check, especially when you're looking at passages that you might be rushing or that you might be slowing down. It can be a great tool, and it is a great tool for practicing, for using it for exercises. But when it comes to
Даже если год прошел в делах вдали от близких, лишь в кругу коллег, то в праздники мы снова вместе все. Неважно, за столом или на звонке, под Новый год так много разных дел, но главное здесь все-таки одно – успеть сказать спасибо.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. So today's video is on triads and how to play them. So triads are just another one of those good piano techniques to have in your tool belt, kind of like scales, because they not only help your coordination and build that, but they also enrich your understanding of music theory and chords. And the more chords you know as a musician, the better. The triads we're focusing on today are suitable for grade 1 level students, whether it be through the RCM or the ABSRM. So what a triad is, tri equals 3, so there are 3 note chords, and they can be played in solid or broken form, so blocked or broken. You'll hear on the piano in a second. And at a grade 1 level, we do it hand separate, one at a time, and we go 1 octave. So you start in root position. I'm doing a lot of air piano right now, but you start in root position, you hop up all the way to the next root position, octave, and then back down again. So let's go to the keyboard so this makes more sense. Let's quickly review major and minor chords and how to invert them. So major chords, there are happy chords that are formed using the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of a scale. So say I want to play C major chord, which I just was. A C major scale is all the white keys. So to play a C major chord, you just play the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th of the notes of the scale. So if I want to transform this into a minor scale, I just lower the 3rd a semitone. So now I have C, E flat, G. Alright, so just for more practice, let's do another one. So let's do A major. An A major scale has 3 sharps. So for an A major chord, I want to use the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th note of that scale. In this case, that would be A, C sharp, and E. So that's an A major chord. And you can kind of tell too, because it has a that happy sound to it. Now to make a minor, all we got to do is we lower the semitone, just like with the C. So you lower it from a C sharp to a C, and now we've got that sad minor sound. Now let's take a look at inverting chords using our C major chord, just because it's an easy one to do examples of. So C major chord has 3 letters or notes, so C, E, and G, which means there are 3 different configurations of it. So we have the root form, which is just when the letter name, so C major, C is on the bottom. We can rearrange it with the C on top, and now E is on the bottom, so that's the first inversion. And then the second inversion is with G as the bottom note. And then if you go up again, you're back to that original root position shape. So when you're playing solid or block triads, you always start with the chord in root position, which is like your home base, invert it in the other 2 arrangements, and finish with the root chord again on top. Then you descend back down to the original root position chord. This is a great technique to practice with literally any chord, whether it's a major or a minor chord. So be sure to get your left hand going too. So you can do the exact same thing in the left hand, and it's just great chord practice. You could do you could do anything. You could do G minor, or you could do A major. It's just a great chord playing and learning exercise. When you're playing solid triads, like these are the solid ones we're doing, watch that you're not playing them really staccato or jumpy. So try to hold on to the chord as long as you can before switching to the next one, just so it doesn't have that really abrupt jump to it. So another challenge of playing the solid chords is pressing down all 3 notes at the same time, especially when there's a black key involved.
In this film,
because all your fingers are kind of at it, your flat here is higher than the other 2 notes. So It's going to take a little bit of practice to get them all sounding simultaneously. What I find works the best is just working on a quick attack. So make sure you're pressing
oral tests, and it's very much based on the kind of finishing tests we've had throughout the grades. It's all about what can you hear. There's one difference though, because in the earlier grades there were kind of headings that an examiner would be asking you about. You'd be generally asked for two different areas of the piece, so you could think about two different things while the piece was playing and then answer some questions. So all the way back in grade 1 we started on dynamics and articulation. We added tempo change for grade 2, we added major minor tonality for grade 3, we added musical character for grade 4, we added style and period for grade 5. Then for grade 6 and 7 we added structure and texture. So it's worth holding all those headings in mind, but at grade 8 the examiner will play a piece of music and simply ask you to comment. You don't have to clap back a rhythm or say what time the piece is in. You don't have to answer specific questions. You're merely invited to comment on the piece and to identify any particular features that strike you as you're listening to the piece. Now, in a way, you might think that this makes the question a little bit easier. Well, it is easier at one level because you're not going to be faced with a question that you might not be able to answer. On the other hand, you've got to think of something meaningful to say about the piece. And of course, the examiner may well prompt with the odd question depending on what you're able to say about it. So if you're able to give a really good full answer, that would be a way of staving off any of those supplementary questions. But if you're struggling to say something, then the examiner, trying to be helpful, might well ask you to comment on a particular area which you may or may not be happy to be asked about. So the thing is to be ready to say something that really kind of fills up a paragraph or two of useful comment. And the more objective you can be, the better. Obviously, if you listen to a piece of music and you make observations like, it's got a beautiful tune, it's got lots of notes in it, and it's mainly loud, that's sort of okay, but it's a little bit general, a little bit vague. So it's worth just sort of thinking maybe through the checklist that I've just listed, or just sort of thinking as you're listening to the piece, is there anything that I could usefully say about the melody of this piece? Is there anything I could say about the rhythm? Is there anything I could say about the harmony or the tonality of the piece? Is there anything I could say about the texture of the piece? Is there anything I could say about the structure of the piece? Are there any other particularly noticeable things that I might want to say about dynamics, about use of the pedal, anything else? And certainly you want to be able to say something about the style and period of the piece. So if you want practice in all these various areas, you could look back over any of the previous films and get practice in dealing with some of those things. And we also have separate films attached to this grade 8 package that really cover the area of style and period, and just giving a few pointers as to how you would define that, and also discussing a bit of work on the structure and texture issues, just so you're clear about those things in particular. But for now, we're going to get straight into listening to a piece of music and seeing what we can observe about it. Now, you only get to hear this piece once, so as soon as you start listening to it, just think, what could I identify about any of those areas, or what are the things that strike me about this piece? And then, as I say, be as concrete as you possibly can in giving objective statements about the piece. And tactically as well, try to avoid getting into things that you're not terribly sure about, because that can happen quite easily, that you start talking about the time signature and then you suddenly realise that you're not entirely sure what the time signature is. So if you're not clear about that, best not to go there. Okay, well, have a listen to this piece of music and see what you can observe about it. want to pause the film at this moment, just have a little think about what you would say about that.